All right, welcome to Application Management, Advanced Topics, and Troubleshooting. I'm Brian Keller, Lead Program Manager on the Configuration Manager team.
And I'm Mayur Gadiali, Program Manager on Config Manager team.
Before we begin, I would just like to ask who was here for part one of our session. Okay. If you weren't here for part one of the session, you missed probably the most tweeted session of MMS so far, except for the wrong reasons. So we had some demo issues. I think we've resolved those. But I'm not guaranteeing it, because when I get overconfident, we can see what happens in the last session. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of improvise here a little bit, because a lot of our demos build on themselves. And so we're going to go back in and we're going to finish off a couple things from part one. Since I saw a bunch of hands, most of you are here for that. We're going to finish off a couple of the demos in the first 5 minutes. Then we'll jump into our application management, advanced topics, and troubleshooting content, and hopefully roll through with these right into dinner. And then I will proceed immediately to the nearest bar and have some drinks. You know what? There's just too many people here, but I'm almost ready to buy for everyone. But since I'm not going to have a job after what happened the last day, I probably should keep my money instead. No, I'm just kidding. My boss is merciful. Okay, we're going to jump into those demos, and then we'll get on to the part two topics.
All right. So where we last left off was what we're going to do here is during the break, Brian created Adobe Reader 9.3 application here. We got one MSI deployment type. And we're going to go ahead and deploy it because the content's already distributed to the distribution point. So we'll just go ahead and deploy it to users as required application. One more time. The content's already distributed to the distribution point, so we'll hit next. We'll make it user install and required. We won't touch any of this because we want it ASAP. Stay with the notification default and close it. Now we would pop back into the client here. And pull for the user policy to see. Now, this is when you start talking.
Yeah. It's a moment of truth. What did I say? I wasn't going to buy people drinks, or I was? Try kicking it one more time, because we did get in there pretty fast.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have been great. Thanks.
All right. All right, so we're installing 9.3. This is Software Center, by the way. I don't know how much of this you've got to see so far, the conference, but we don't expect users to go in here all that often. A lot of it is maybe go in there if a help desk person asks you to go in there. But sometimes we will drive the end users into the Software Center based on some notifications. We'll also, if they're pending reboot or we're installing a bunch of stuff, we'll let them know. But that's all configurable through your deployment properties. Looks like Software Center hasn't registered the install yet, but it's actually right here. We've got the icon, probably Adobe Reader finishing up some last-minute stuff and sending back the proper state to us. We know it's installed successfully. And we also do a detection method check post-install to ensure that everything looks good. So with that, we also, in the last session, were showing UDA. As a reminder, let me pop out of here and go to our server and go into screen real quick. We were looking at Melissa, our classic end user, and we're looking at primary devices. And here we see we don't actually have a primary device associated with Melissa, but we do have some data we've collected. Melissa has logged on 4 times to this PC, Melissa PC, makes sense. But we haven't actually created any automatic user device affinity rules. As an admin, you can add this, but let's show you one of the ways to add a user relationship to a device, and we can do that. The user themselves can do that through the portal. So we'll go. This is in the way. I will bring up the software catalog, which I think might already be up. Good. And if I go to My Devices, take a second to load. One thing, while it's doing that, I'll just quickly mention where you can configure that is under Administration, under Client Agent Settings. You can either turn on or turn off the ability of a user to set their primary device. Pop back in here. And so, unfortunately, you'll have to trust me because our demos are a little out of sync. I would have showed you this was grayed out, and it actually was grayed out during the break. When I applied the policy, it was now enabled. So you can go ahead and set that checkbox, and there's nothing else to do there.
Just one thing to call out here on this page, if you're managing mobile devices, you would also see mobile devices in My Mobile Devices section. So you could, as an end user, even wipe the device and re-enroll it afterwards. So there are some functionality that we provide on this page for mobile devices.
Correct. So go back into the server. Let me cancel this out, and I will fly back in there. And hopefully we will see that Melissa's setting is taking place, and it has. So now Melissa PC is a primary device based on her own setting of that within the software catalog. Also, as I mentioned, we have a number of different ways to create user device affinity, and so we'll show you what the type was here. And in this case, it was catalog defined by the user. So with that, I believe we will move into part 2 of app management. What we're going to cover in part 2 officially is we're going to talk more in depth about global conditions and global expressions. So all the requirement rules that you can add to an application are based on these things called global conditions. We have a number of these built in out of the box. When I go ahead and select free memory or hard drive space, those are all built-in global conditions behind the actual requirement rules that you can set in the apps. You can create your own. You can create groups of those and create one expression with relationships between the different conditions, and I'll show you that in a demo during the presentation. We'll also go in and talk more about detection methods. In the last presentation, we talked about the importance of detection methods and being able to provide a state-based application distribution system, and we're going to walk through some in-depth steps on enhanced detection methods. We're also going to show uninstall and supersedence. When we set out to create an application management system for you all to use, we started thinking about the life cycle. And it's funny how we had this life cycle chart, and it started out with you create the app, and then you supersede the app, and then you uninstall the app. So there's this life cycle. But as we moved through our different milestones, beta 1, beta 2, we couldn't do all those things. So in beta 1, it was like, well, we can create the app. Then beta 2, well, we've got dependencies, we have supersedence. And so finally, we've gotten to a place where we've shipped, and we can do all those things that we wanted to do with apps. So being able to install them, do enhanced detection, uninstall them, create supersedence relationships among them. And so that's pretty exciting that we were able to get that, and we'll show that in this presentation. Also, simulated deployments. This was a huge piece of feedback we got from our MVPs, TAP customers, was that, here's the thing. Before, we could create collections with rules, and it was a bit difficult, but the one positive thing is that when we created a collection based on some attributes, we could see all the systems or users that would be affected. We could even provide that as a report to upper management and say, tonight we're going to deploy and we're going to touch 100 systems. It's right there in the collection membership. One of the disadvantages of the application model is that you're creating these rules and you're creating these detection methods, and you've tested them, probably in a small environment, but now you're going to send this thing out, hopefully broadly deploy, and let the rules work for you. But there's some angst there, because now I don't really know how many systems I'm going to touch. I don't know what the impact is going to be. I can't provide that information to my upper management, that I'm going to impact so many systems. So based on feedback, we created a feature called Simulate Deployment, where we can actually simulate a deployment but not download content, install, or do anything. And Meyer's going to talk in depth about that. And then we'll show you some advanced troubleshooting. I think we might even get into the logs, which is a dangerous thing. So let's talk about global conditions. Global conditions, as I mentioned, are the foundation of requirement rules. We have some user global conditions, device global conditions. Some samples are memory, free disk space, Windows version, those types of things. And when I think of global conditions in the relationship to requirement rules, I kind of think of it as a pyramid. So you have these system attributes. Maybe machine is a corporate device, and that's set in the registry somehow. I know some customers that they want to know if the machine is a corporate device, they actually tag it. A global condition might be a machine is a corporate device, and it's based on this registry key. The requirement rule is if corporate device equals true, you can apply that attribute as a rule to your apps. So think of it that way. They kind of build on each other. By the way, device has been misspelled since the very beginning, and no one has caught that. And I just kind of left it in there. So there's a little thing you could know for probably for 2 years it's been like that. Just notice. That's how we roll here. So global expressions. As I mentioned, you can take a number of different rules, and you can group them together in a pretty decent complex expression logic. So you can create sets of rules that you can reuse. Essentially, the main benefit is reuse. I've got this standard desktop. It's a corporate device. It's running Windows 7. It's got a base amount of memory. It's got a certain amount of hard drive space. If a machine doesn't meet that baseline, then we're not deploying software to it. Simple as that. So you can create a set of rules as an expression and use that expression repeatedly within your applications when you're defining them. So let's go in and show that a little bit. Every time I touch 2 to move to demos, I'm going to have nightmares. It's going to be very difficult for me going forward. No, I'm just kidding. I'll get over it. All right, here we go. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the software library, and we're going to show global conditions. Here's all the built-in conditions, and you can see those listed. One of the things I can do is I can create a new global condition. And let me go full screen here. And I will call it corporate device. And I will go ahead and make that based on a registry value.
Integer.
It'll be an integer, and I'm going to go ahead. Here's one thing we can do is we can actually browse the registry, which I think is pretty cool. A lot of tools kind of make you type in a path. So we added this browse capability a little bit later in the product development cycle. You can also browse a remote machine if you have a golden image, and you can do that as well. So that's pretty convenient. Hardware. And we'll go to...
It's not there.
Oh, it's not there. Well, I can create it. That's what happens when you reset your systems. No problem. I'm going to make it real easy. Hardware, new key, device, and I can just base that on a key, not a value. So I'll just go with that. All right. What's not so cool about our browse is you can't refresh. No, I'm just kidding. Here we go. Go right back in there. Hardware, here's corporate device. And so I can base that on this key. It's a setting, it's a registry. So you could actually do a value. If there was a set of values, you could do a value, go in there, pick out the value. I'm just going to base it on the basic keys being there. Click OK. And now I've got this new custom global condition based on a registry key. Now what I can do is I can step into creating an expression. The expression allows me to use not only built-in global conditions, but also any custom ones that I built. So let me build a quick set by adding the custom key I just created, which is corporate device. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to go existential. So this is basically saying if that key exists on the system, that's what we're going to evaluate as part of the global condition. And we can do not rules as well, like if it doesn't exist, so you can basically set it that way. I'm going to say if it exists. Now I can create another one. Let's do kind of that concept of a standard desktop I was talking about. So let's do operating system, say Windows 7, and we'll hopefully get all the Windows 7, one of. Maybe add, what do you think, one more total physical memory greater than or equal to 1023. And that'll do it. Once again, I can actually create different relationships here in this expression. Must be corporate device and one of Windows 7 and physical memory or some other attributes. I can group them and create some pretty complex expressions to be able to evaluate my global conditions for the requirement rules. So let me go ahead and finish that.
Name.
Oh, didn't do my name. This is my custom or corporate standard corporate desktop. That's good enough. All right, now if I go into an application, let's pick out this one. I like this one because this is the one I used at the break to make sure the system is working. So it makes me feel happy. We're going to properties. Oh, we got to go into the deployment type itself, actually. Once I go into the deployment type, I go into the requirements. Now I can add. Once again, I'll go into custom, and I should have that expression there, which is my standard corporate desktop, and true, which means my expression should be evaluated true. If my expression is true, it's Win 7, it's got this much memory, and it's a corporate device, that'll evaluate in the system and install. Right?
I think we're done.
Go ahead.
So,
clicker's right there.
Stepping into what we call enhanced detection method. Brian touched in part 1 how important detection methods are with regards to application and application model. When we started building application model, as Brian walked you through, like in beta 1, beta 2, RC, in the beginning we only had 2 detection methods that we supported, and that was MSI product code, and the other one was that you could write your script. Now, with the script, we quickly realized that with writing scripts, it is kind of a black box. So you can say, hey, look for this registry key, look for this particular file version, look for this particular date and time stamp for the file. If this folder exists, you have all that logic built into the script. And when that script gets executed to see whether this particular app is installed or not on the system, it's going to return true or false. And what that leads to is that since we don't recognize natively your business logic within our in-console monitoring experience, we cannot report where did this fail? Where did this detection method that you created basically fail? So what we've done is we have added other detection types that we could use. So we have added native support for registry and files, and we can continue to use the Windows installer code that we had previously. The other thing that we want to point out here is this, that the detection method along with the requirement rules on an application model is a very, very powerful concept, right? You better get the detection method right. If you don't get the detection method right, you're going to keep offering the app to the user and to the machine every 7 days, what we call a global evaluation. That's when we enforce the state-based nature of the app. If the app is not present on the device, we'll run the evaluation, detect it, and we'll enforce it. So if you don't get the detection method right, then it's not going to work for you. The other stuff that we want to call out is the requirement rules. We want to check whether that Brian just talked about. Does it satisfy the CPU thing, or does it specify the operating system rule? Does it have enough memory on it? And only if the client satisfies all those requirements rules are we going to download the content and install it. We're not just going to go ahead and download it. In packages and programs, the way we would try it is we would download the content and try to install it, and then it would fail on you. So those are not the things we want to do with the application model. We have the smarts built into the application model to do the right things for you, but the onus is on the admin to make sure that they test the detection methods and the requirement rules before they go deploy it to their users. So as I mentioned earlier, we have three providers for enhanced detection method. Windows installer code base, the code that you get for a particular application, you can use that. It's pretty unique to each of the applications available from ISVs. You can go ahead and use it for detecting whether that particular app is installed or not. If you want to get fancy with the detection method, you can see, like just Brian said, is this my corporate device? If it's a corporate device, only then install this app. Do not install it on any other device. And similarly with the files and file folder browsers. We can say, does this file exist? Does this file have a particular date's timestamp on it? Does it meet the size? And it just continues. And we'll leave it to your imagination. How complex do you want to get with this? The complex expression containing multiple rules can be built using grouping logic applied. So the experience you see for creating this enhanced detection method is similar to what Brian just showed you with regard to creating global expression. That's the similar UI experience we have.
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to do is be very consistent in the UI with the experience. And we're a big product group, and we have different developers working on different parts of the product, and it can be sometimes that our experiences are out of sync. So we made sure that with the global conditions and building those expressions and also building your enhanced detection methods, that was the same kind of expression builder. We want to just reduce the training costs and make sure that you are familiar with this type of thing in one way.
Okay, thanks. So coming to application install, we want to manage application lifecycle, and no application management lifecycle is complete if you cannot uninstall an app from the user's machine or from the machine. So we went ahead and created an uninstall action in the deployment wizard for you. We want to call out that when partners and customers create their own deployment types, this application model is fairly extensible. So when, as it was called out in today's State of the Union, that Citrix has their own deployment type. When you go ahead and create your own deployment types as a partner, you want to make sure that you support all the actions and the functionality of the application model on that particular deployment type, or the end user who's going to, as an admin who's going to use the system, is going to have a, not so consistent experience per se. So uninstall deployment is now an action within the deployment process. The way admin would go about doing it is create an uninstall deployment targeted to a collection, and we will go ahead and uninstall the app if it is detected on the system. Now, with regard to uninstall deployment, we really don't care whether we meet the requirement rules or not. Whether on the other side for the install deployment type, we do care whether the requirement rules are met. But if we don't meet the requirement rules for an uninstall, but if we still detect that app is there, we'll just go ahead and proceed to uninstall it. So there are different deployment types within our system. They are AppV, the virtualization deployment type, the MSI deployment type, the script deployment type, and the mobile deployment types. So with regard to application virtualization deployment type, all of the logic to uninstall an app is hidden behind the covers. We in the config manager team know how to install an AppV and uninstall an AppV based on the good of the virtualized app. So that is all taken care of when you create an app, a virtualized DT, to be deployed to the user. The next thing is for MSI. So for the MSI, it's a little bit easier, but not quite. Not as good as the AppV part of it. For MSI, when you create an MSI deployment, we would use the /x command and use the MSI exe to uninstall that particular app if the user chooses. And I'll show you in the demo what I mean about this. You can choose to modify this command line on the deployment type property so you can make it silent or whichever other flags you may want to add. Now, the real fun begins when you start deploying applications that are not MSI-based or AppV, but they are executables. And at this point, we are not sure what that command line looks like. Does it mean setup.exe/uninstall, or is it setup.exe/s? We just don't know about it. And you will have to yourself go figure those out before you use those command lines. Maybe sometimes you just go to the command prompt and type / to figure out what that setup does. So with that, what I'll do is I'll jump into our next demo to show you how the uninstall works. Not sure what state it is in. Oh, well, it's good. So the scenario is like this. Within your enterprise, there is a policy, new policy that the config manager admin needs to enforce, and that is the finance group of people cannot have any games installed on their machine. And by that, basically, if there is one detected, then you may want to remove it, or you have to remove it. So what we've done...
So instead of looking at the budget, they're playing games or something, or what?
I don't know.
Okay, awesome.
We are not getting any bonus, so we should keep quiet.
We should use this at Microsoft, actually.
Right. So I have jumped ahead a little bit here, and I will tie this up later when I talk about simulated deployment. But what I've done is this XNA game app, I created this. It has one deployment type, and it has a product code. This is the product code that we're using to detect it. And this is the command line that we're using to install it. And this is the command line that we'll be using to uninstall it. Now, since it's an MSI-based, these command lines were already pre-populated. But if you were to use an XE, then you would have to touch up these command lines in order to make sure that it works for you. The other thing I want to call out is that as an admin, as I said earlier, I'll tie this up later, but this is getting ahead of the next thing that I was going to talk about, is the simulate deployment type. I want to see how many people within the enterprise as an admin has this game installed on their machine. So what I did is I created a simulate deployment type with an uninstall action targeted to all users. And what it shows me is that the 33% of all my users have this game installed on it. So my next task is to just go ahead and delete this one, and I'll get to you later why I do that. What we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and create a deployment for uninstall. And we're going to target it to our finance collection. The content is already out there. We'll pick the uninstall. So uninstall is always required. It cannot be made available. You don't expect the user to go to the catalog and uninstall the app. So we took away that option.
But if a application has uninstall capability,
right.
if they go into Software Center, after it's installed, the uninstall button will be lit up. So they will be able to, in some cases, remove software on their own. But yes, good point.
Thank you. We'll just go ahead and finish this deployment type, or the deployment. And here we have created a real uninstall deployment. Actions. There you go. Go back to the client here. Scroll bars are. And we'll kick off a user policy cycle using this applet that we have shown earlier. And there you go. So we will go ahead and remove this deployment from the user's machine. And if the user gets smart and they redeploy it, as long as you have this targeted, since we are state-based, we'll remove it again and again, and we can play that game with them as long as they want.
By default, every 7 days, the game will be played. But you can up that frequency, so if you need to. All right, application supersedence. This is a very powerful feature, and it actually takes advantage of a lot of facilities we have in the app model, including uninstall and detection methods, requirement rules. So supersedence is a feature that, once again, it really came from customer feedback. So it just shows how important it is interacting with you folks out there, with our MVPs, TAP customers, just getting general feedback and being able to figure out what you need to really manage your environment. So we really appreciate your feedback, and hopefully you'll be pleased with the results. So in essence, supersedence is a way to say, I have an older version of application, say Adobe Reader 9. I'm going to deploy out Adobe Reader 10. And essentially, I need to have that superseded. And in fact, there's a number of different ways that you can configure supersedence. Because we put a lot of options into supersedence, because we know that there's a ton of different types of software packages out there. Some vendors, their newer versions can automatically detect and remove older versions. Some vendors need you to explicitly uninstall the old one before they'll even kick off the install of the new one. Sometimes some of your departments may need older versions. Some departments might need newer versions. In some cases, when people go to the catalog, you may want them to only see the new version and not the older version. Sometimes you want them to see both and they choose. There's so many different things that we learned and scenarios we learned when we were investigating supersedence with you. So we put a lot of different functionality in here. But it does require some explanation so that you can figure out how it all works. Essentially, we have some issues if you're deploying. If we don't have the concept of supersedence, detection methods can work against us. Because if you have Adobe Reader 8 on your system, for example, and then you deploy Reader 9, and you have two deployments for 8 and 9, and you deploy 9 and it detects that it's not there, and it installs and wipes out 8. But 8 is still an active deployment. Well, 8 comes by in the evaluation cycle. We're state-based, remember. Oh, geez, 8's supposed to be here. Put it back. You can get into a race condition where apps are installing over each other, back and forth. And we saw that not with Adobe, particularly the later packages. Adobe did a great thing, and they're able to actually uninstall previous versions with their newer packages. But that wasn't always the case. So with the earlier versions, 5, 6, 7, they didn't have that capability. So my point is that it just really depends on how vendors have set up their packages and their newer versions, and so you have to be able to adapt to that, and hopefully we'll give you the tools to do that. So some details around the design. You define a supersedence relationship at the application level first, and then we allow you to kind of map your DTs. So, for example, let's say you're an MSI Adobe shop and you've deployed Adobe MSI, but then you pick up app virtualization. It's something that's being picked up in your organization, and you want to move to virtualized Adobe. We can actually supersede across technologies. So we can go ahead and supersede Adobe 10, for example, App V, and supersede Adobe 9 MSI. And we can actually do some things like remove the old MSI and put down App V. So there's some flexibility there across deployment types. So you create that relationship at the app level, and then you map across deployment types. We have two options, too. There's a checkbox I'll show you in a minute in the demo. You can allow the installer, the new installer, the app that's superseding the other app, the old app, to just do the right thing. You trust it. It'll come in, it'll see the old one, it'll remove it, or upgrade it even. In some cases, you can't trust that the new installer will properly handle the presence of the old app. So we can actually, with our uninstall feature, ConfigMan can run an uninstall of the old one and put down the new one for you. So kind of working around maybe some deficiencies in a vendor's packages across versions. We also have a relationship manager that you can see the relationship among apps and how they supersede each other and dependencies and so forth. So that can be helpful. So let me talk a little bit about supersedence, show you some cases and some conflicts. So we're sticking with the Adobe examples. Say Adobe 9 supersedes Adobe 8. And the accounting app depends on Reader 8. There's a hard dependency on an older version of an app. So if the client gets all the policies for 9 and 8, and it has a policy for 8 because accounting app depends on 8, then what's going to happen is that 9 is going to be installed if no applications are previously deployed. For example, if the accounting app isn't there, Adobe Reader 8's not there, it'll deploy 9. If, however, accounting app depends on 8 and it's all there, we won't be able to supersede. We won't be able to replace. We can't make an assumption that your accounting app is going to work with Adobe Reader 9. We're just not going to do that. So we kind of take into account dependency relationships, supersedence relationships, and make sure we're making a smart move and not kind of just maybe causing some conflicts or problems for the accounting app. So let's get in there and I'll show it to you. On the server. So I've got Adobe Reader 10. Let me go full screen here. Still got a little bit of scrolling, but it's not bad. Go into Properties. And I'm going into the properties of the application. That's where I'm going to access the supersedence relationship. And I'm going to say that Adobe 10 supersedes Adobe Reader 9. So I've set that relationship. First of all, Adobe Reader 10 supersedes Adobe Reader 9.3. We picked up the technology. And here's where we go ahead and map the deployment type. The old deployment type is a Windows installer MSI. We can go ahead and replace that with the Windows installer Adobe Reader X. Now, if we're not confident that the Adobe Reader 10 is going to do the right thing, if Adobe Reader 9.3 is present, we can just say, you know, let's have Configuration Manager automatically uninstall the previous version of Adobe Reader when we go ahead and deploy the Reader 10. So this setting down here allows users to see deployments to this application, all applications that supersede the application catalog. So essentially what this says is that we're going to allow them to see previous versions. So they have the option to install Adobe Reader 10 if it's available to them. They have the option to install 9.3 if for some reason they need to use an older version. So we're not going to check that box. Because we only want them to see the latest version when they go to the software catalog. I'm going to go ahead and deploy Adobe Reader 10. Do that to my classic all users, which includes Melissa. Content is already available. Install is available. Schedule it.
Yeah, just go.
Be available here as soon as possible, 11:36.
You don't.
Click Next. Mom alerts, and we'll go ahead and finish that off. Close that out. Now we'll go back to the client. Now, it can take between 1 and 3 minutes for the application to actually show up in the catalog. It's just as it's processing and getting ready to put that out there, so it may not be instantaneous. So one thing I was going to show you, it may be there already, but I'm not sure it will be, so we can take a look. If it's not, though, I have some filler prepared. Never fear. Let that load. Oh,
What do you know?
it already made it there.
Yeah.
Darn it. You know what? I'm going to use my filler anyway. So I noticed this catalog is red. It's themed red. And I'm sure that's great for Target Corporation and maybe some other companies. But Microsoft is blue, and there's actually some competitors, I would think, of Target that would want blue instead of red and so forth. So we wanted to give that flexibility to be able to change catalog colors. So you can actually do that. For those that played around with really early versions, we didn't have a very good way to do this. You had to go into the actual catalog XML, go to Paint, find a hex value of a color you wanted, paste it into some XML elements, and restart some services. It was fun. It was kind of fun to demo because it was super geeky, but not great for customers that are trying to do things quickly and get their job done. So what we did is we actually built that into the properties of the role, website role. So let me fire in right here. I don't know if you've seen this yet. Go in. Customization. You can add a name that will show up, and you can actually go ahead and change the color of the catalog. Go ahead and apply that. We'll go back into our client. And I don't know if that'll take right away either, but what the heck, we can try. Ah, there it is. Okay, so now it's blue. See? Excellent. All right, so now what we're going to do is, let me do this, because I want you to be able to see Adobe Reader 9 is down here. Remember, we set up the supersedence relationship with Adobe Reader 10. Get rid of that, okay, cool. And it supersedes Adobe 9 with uninstall. So when I click install, it's going to go ahead and start telling the user I'm preparing your installation. I've done the evaluation. I recognize that it's applicable on your system. You meet all the requirements. Downloading and installing. And well, so part of the process is to remove Adobe Reader 9, so that's gone. And I'd like to just see within Software Center how we're progressing.
The other one.
So still updating. We consider this an update action because we're superseding. So it just takes a moment. We should get Adobe Reader 10 icon there in a minute. I don't know how long the installer will take. If it takes more than a few seconds, we'll pop out and come back to it.
Could you repeat that?
He asked, what happens if Adobe 9 is running? So we will try to run the uninstall command for Adobe 9 as part of our deployment. So we won't detect a running application. And so then the uninstall of Adobe Reader 9 will handle that in whatever way it handles the running application. And that's going to be, we just don't have the smarts to know if an app is running or what process is tied specifically to the application. So what will happen is Adobe Reader 9, that command line will run, and based on whatever the installer decides to do for the user, that's what will happen. You can see here now that Adobe Reader 10 is installed, and we've removed 9 as part of the process, and we also pop up a status there. Here's what I'll show you. All right, so if I go into the software library, I'll just show you really quick. One way to test the end user experience, I'm sure you're wondering, like, boy, I need to know what's happening if it's running. Then what you would want to do is go to your programs and test running this command as part of a running version of Adobe Reader 9. In that case, that's what you have to do. All right?
All right.
Obviously, I take that feedback. I'm assuming from your question that you'd like us to investigate in the future how we could maybe be smart about processes that are running and maybe provide a UX experience around it, I'm assuming. If other people have feedback on that, I'd love to get that if you want to come up after the presentation and we can talk. Thank you.
So within the 2 sessions, so far what we've seen since 2:15 onwards is that we have created apps, we have talked about detection methods, we have talked about requirement rules, we have talked about dependencies, supersedence, uninstall, a whole bunch of stuff here, right? As an admin, it can be intimidating when you first look at it this way. So I would be intimidated myself. So wouldn't it be nice if you can build all these dependency requirement rules, detection methods, apps, multiple DTs, and go try it out for zero risk and validate everything that you built and making sure that it works across your entire enterprise without ever messing up the real system. And hence, we created what we call the simulate application deployment. So simulate, the goal of this is to basically allow the admin to be more confident in what he does day to day with the application model. And so for him to become an application rules author, this role is new to the config manager admin who's deploying software now, because previously all these rules used to reside on the collections when you targeted packages and programs to them. Now we have taken those out of the collection and we put them into the application itself. The result of that is your inventory on the collection could be 7 days old, but with the rules being on the app, we run them in real time, and that's where they get processed. With the simulate deployment type, we basically have the smarts that we will not download the content, and we'll never run the installer per se. But what we'll do is we'll try to detect if the app is there. If it is there, then we'll report back as success. But what we're going to do here is run in the rules mode only. Check all the requirement rules that you added to the deployment type, whether they're satisfied how they apply to the given system and which system they don't apply to. So the net is here. You can go hog wild, create whatever you want, and do a simulate deployment and see how that behaves within your system. And then take appropriate action, modify it before you create a new deployment type. The thing with this simulated deployment type is, for all intensive purposes, these are real policies. So if you have an install deployment that is conflicting with an installed simulate deployment that is conflicting with an uninstalled real deployment, then that app is never going to be uninstalled from the system, because in conflict resolution, if you have a resource that's targeted with an install and an uninstall deployment, the install always wins. The reason here is because the end user wants the software to do the job, and we're going to make sure that the software is there for him. So we would make sure that the admin would explicitly remove the install deployment, which is a simulated deployment, and then the uninstall would take effect. There are some guidance here is, since they are real deployments, there are slight perfits. So go use this, try them out. Once you're done with them, go delete it, and then create your real deployments. Do we need anything here? Go ahead. So with that, we'll pop back into the demo here. So during my uninstall demo, I showed you the simulated deployment, which told me how many machines, how many users had that particular game installed on their machine. I did that using simulated deployment. The way to do simulated deployment is pretty straightforward. Let me show you here real quick. Oh, yeah, thank you. So we have this Office 2010 app. It actually has one virtual app deployment type. And let me pop in here and show you how complex this can get. So we have all these requirement rules. Of course, if I were to use the global expression that Brian made earlier, I would get rid of all this and just add that global expression in here. So this can be as complex as you want it to be. And on top of that, to make life even more interesting, what we have is that this particular app is dependent on the virtualization client from Microsoft, and it's also dependent on the Office deployment kit. So we have created these dependencies that need to be present in order for the successful deployment of Office 2010 app. Now, if you created all this and you go deploy it as a real deployment to your systems, I don't know, I wouldn't probably do that. So what we would do here is we would just go ahead and create simulate deployment. Simulate deployment, target it to all users. It could be for install or uninstall. If it is for install, you can always say that deploy automatically without user being logged in. This is, again, the pre-deployment feature that we talked about earlier in part 1. We do not need the user to be present at the system when we basically assess the compliance of this particular policy.
And that's based on the primary device.
And that's based on the user device affinity that Brian talked about earlier. So for all intensive purposes, I'm not going to click on this. We already have created deployment here, which is a simulate deployment. And what it's showing is that it's 100% compliance. Let me pop here into the monitoring view for this deployment and show you what it looks like. Since we have only one client in the system that actually returns back and talks to the server, so this is not really that interesting, but you can visualize how it would look if it was targeted to a collection of thousands of assets, user or devices. So it says, yes, it is successful on one, and we can drill into the status, and it'll say on which, and it was basically compliant on Melissa's PC.
This looks pretty simple, but if you think about the app that Meyer just showed you with the dependencies on other applications, App V client and the deployment kits, which have their own requirement rules and own detection methods, and then you've got requirement rules on the Office 2010 app itself. You may have supersedence relationships involved in the situation as well. So You test it in the lab on 5 machines, as Meyer pointed out, might not give you quite the confidence you need to roll this out to 50,000 users. So simulate the deployment, see the results. Against 50,000 users, you get rich results back, describing all the different systems that it would successfully stall on, things that were missing, you know, those types of things. So really, I think with the simulated deployments, you're going to have that confidence you need to be able to tell your management team and whoever else needs to know that, yeah, this is what we're going to go after, here's what we expect to happen, here's the impact, and we've done it because we simulated this whole thing before actually deploying. So it really is a helpful feature, I think.
Yep. So with that, I will pop back to the PowerPoint. And what we did here was that we had created a staged environment and took a snapshot of how it would look like when you had a lot of assets that were targeted with a simulated deployment. So we have Office 2010 here, targeted to all systems with a simulated deployment, and you can see it's compliant on 96.4% of those assets. Just to give you an example, look at the pie chart, how it looks. It says success, 97 assets are success, requirements not met. Basically, that means when we ran the rules that were associated with that particular deployment type, they did not satisfy the rules, so we are putting them in requirements not bucket here. And then the 5 of the assets did not reply. They never got the policy. They never processed it for multiple reasons. It could be that the person is off to a vacation and the machine shut off, or for some reason the machine's decommissioned and has been task sequenced or whatever, yeah. And it's still part of the collection. So that will show up in the unknown. But here's something to look at. And by the way, this is going to be demoed in the keynote tomorrow with Brad and Bill. And Bill has an awesome demo of a what we call the simulated deployment. Go check it out.
He almost said pre-flight. You could hear him with the P, because we used to call this thing pre-flight in the early stages, and then you know, some different folks got a hold of it and figured pre-flight checks and airlines and stuff. We need something else, so simulate. I kind of like pre-flight because it really gives you that sense of what you're about to do. Going through all your checks, making sure things. Another thing I wanted to point out, though, is this is some paint mock-up thing. There's 97 users here you can see, or more than that, actually, because we've got the whole total 140. This is actually an admin console running against a system in our building and against users. Probably my machine is in there somewhere. So this is an actual you know, site that we have running, and we're getting statistics, testing our own stuff, making sure that it works. So what you're seeing here is actual statistics from our team.
All right. So with that, we have talked about a lot of stuff here. Application revision management. So if you look at it, all these objects, I'm using the developer term here, but all these objects that we created with the apps and the deployment types and all these objects are alive. They are actually alive. The reason is because they depend on something. Some other stuff depend on them, like they have dependencies, supersedence, all these relationships are created. Some of the admins may even have automation based on this, or that reference these objects. So we did not want anybody to go in and by mistake go to the software library and delete a particular app that was already deployed, because that would be too bad. Hence, we made it really hard within our console to delete an application. If you want to delete an application, you will have to go and delete all the dependency relationship that app is referenced to, and also the supersedence relationship. And then we would allow you to go ahead and delete that deployment. The reason for that is you have explicitly chosen as a customer and as an admin that you understand what you're doing, and you really want to delete this application at this point. So the revision management system is very similar for an app, similar to the DCM. If you go to the application, go to right-click on the properties and go to the revision tab of it, you will see the previous history of all the changes that you may have done. You added a requirement rule to begin with. Now you added a couple more. Then you added dependency rule to it. So we have this list or historical data of all the stuff that has happened over time with regards to this deployment type. Now, we believe that people are not going to use this. Even though it's rich, we believe people are not going to use this. The reason is following. Because when you want to update an app, we want you to use supersedence the way Brian demoed a little bit earlier. You want to update 9.3 to 10 using the supersedence model. We don't want you to go into the properties tab of 9.3, update the content URL for the 10, change the detection method, and call it good, because that would be bad. And what would happen in that case is you would lose compliance. You would not get compliance. You would not get state-based or states from the client that say which app is currently installed on the machine, per se. So with that.
Yeah, so the point is you can look at revision history, you can roll back,
Yeah.
but if you're updating, I heard someone say don't do that, which is true. Don't use this for superseding or updating. Use our supersedence relationships because you can maintain that compliance information. We can do some things around uninstall, understanding relationships, conflicts, dependencies. So use the supersedence feature to do your updating. If you need to roll back or look at previous versions or look at an edit history, certainly revision history is a place to go. Yeah.
Okay. So moving into the troubleshooting part of the session here, this gets a little bit geekier. Stay with me. This is our workflow for an admin who wants to debug why a particular deployment type did not succeed on a given client. So this is the hard way to do it, and I'm going to show you the easier way to do it right after this. So you would look at the policy agent client log to check to ensure that the policy has been received by the client for that deployment. Look at the DCM agent log, check for the log assignments, make sure the enforcement deadline trigger has triggered, and the client's processing all the stuff that it needs to. Then look at CI agent log files, evaluates the CIs for apps, DCM, some jobs, look for any anomalies that you may find with the logs. And if you're using CM trace tool, it'll show you highlighted in red or yellow, so it becomes pretty easy. Unless you're Wally, then you would have a hard time because you opened it up in a notepad. So if you want to go deep down and really, if you have infrastructure errors, so we have a processing engine, rules processing engine, which looks for these requirement rules and processes them. Now, this is what we internally call Lantern rule engine. And if Lantern's throwing you errors, then you need to go and look at all these other logs that I've put out on the right-hand side. Normally, you don't have to do that because that thing works really well. Next would be if you are having content trouble and the content's not been found, then you may want to do a content transfer manager log and look at the content transfer log, and it would tell you where it's failing. Other stuff popping back into the mainstream here, you would look at app intent log, eval log. So this is basically the evaluation of that policy, and if it's going to be enforced, then it's going to show up in this app intent eval log thing. The next is the maintenance coordinator log, and this is just something that we have which runs. And the last one is the app provider log. So if I were to sum this up, the 4 logs that you want to look at is the policy agent log, you want to look at the CI agent log, you want to look at app intent level log, and you want to look at app provider log. For 80 to 90% of the cases, these 4 logs, you should be easily able to figure out why a deployment did not succeed on a client.
Let me take a quick step back and talk a little bit about, right now we're in kind of a worst case scenario. So in CM12, we've done a lot to provide some in-console monitoring, in-console information. We talked about how package programs can be a black box to the system, but apps have a lot of rich information that can be surfaced through our monitoring. Detection methods being found or not, being true or not true. Requirement rules being met or not being met. Content being transferred or not being transferred successfully. In progress, information. So we have a lot of information in console that's going to help you do your job without going to the logs. However, there are cases where we're not going to be able to surface some things, and you may have to get into the logs. But this is not a typical thing that you would need to do in CM07 because of the monitoring that we put in place for both content and deployments. But we always want to provide this kind of in-depth information in case you get in a bind.
Thanks. So with that, I showed you the hard way of debugging a deployment using the log files. Kudos to we did show this particular tool in last MMS. We have actually shipped this tool. It is available on the Download Center. So the Download Center link is right there underneath in the PowerPoint for you to go try it out. We have shipped our toolkit, so download it, use it, and provide feedback for us. So this particular deployment monitoring tool, what it does is it takes all the information on the client. First of all, it runs in 3 modes. Either it runs on the local client, you can remotely connect to the client, or you can import a data that a friend of yours sent as part of an XML from a client that was not behaving properly, and you can bring it up and look at it. So there is client dashboard that you can look at and provides a rich and useful information about client and server communication per se. It will allow you to debug all kinds of deployments, whether they are app deployments, they are DCM deployments, whether they are SUM related, doesn't matter, we'll do it all for you. It also talks about the service window viewer, and then it can launch the CM trace tool right from inside the console, from inside the tool, sorry. So with that, what I'll do is I'll pop in here and show you how that tool looks like.
Once again, I keep harping on this, but we shipped our early release versions to our TAP customers. The logs were not in great shape. We didn't have a lot of friendly, some of the product group laughs because it's true, it's painfully true. Some of the logs, there were no names of applications or deployment types. There were these long strings of GUIDs, and it was a bit messy. And we really took some effort throughout our various milestones to improve the logs, put some friendly names in where you can do some searching using trace and find some information that you need. Even though we made those improvements to the logs and added some friendly information and got rid of these big GUID strings and things of that nature, we were getting feedback that it's just not quite good enough. The logs are still difficult to go into. We recognize that. We did provide the log information here for you if you need to go in there, but this tool is kind of based on feedback we've got from customers around the difficulty of going into logs to find out what's happening. So this is kind of the response to some feedback we got. Hopefully this will make it easier for you.
Yep. Let me get out of the server side and go into the client here. We don't need this anymore. And what we'll do is we'll run this tool on the client itself, run as an admin. And there you go. So want to quickly point out the actions that you have. You can connect to a remote machine. You can refresh the data. You can import the XML file that could have been shipped to you by another admin for a client that doesn't behave. You can export out this information for a client in an XML format and hand it over to somebody else, or you can view logs.
We never want to assume that you're going to have trouble or have to interface with our customer support team, but obviously there are times when you are going to need to do that, and this tool can be used when you export data to be able to supply that information to CSS and help them. They'll have this tool on hand. They'll be able to import it and be able to evaluate it for you. So this is another way you can take advantage of this tool.
So right off the bat, what we have is the client properties here, and as you can see, we know the name of the client. We know what operating system it's got. We got all the useful information about a client that will help you resolve probably 50–60% of all the troubleshooting right here. What GUID it has, which MP is it assigned to, is it an intranet or an internet, what site it is on. Here it says it's TR1. We tell you about the service windows on the client. We tell you what the policy, PowerShell execution policy is set to, what PowerShell version you're using. There is no internet MP here, so we don't have one. And then the retry interval and what it's set at. So pretty useful information just right off the bat as soon as you open the tool for that particular client. We can look at all the updates that were applied to this particular client. Of course, this is a virtual machine, and it was never on an internet, so it never got patched. And hence, we don't show any of this here. But if you were to see, all updates that have been applied would be shown here too. So and here are all the deployments that we've made targeted to this particular client. The one that we are primarily interested in here would be, let me see. Oh, this is the one that you created earlier, Brian. I guess I do not.
Yeah, which one are you looking for?
The Adobe Flash, oh, here.
That's the one right
there.
there.
Yeah, sorry.
When I was testing it at the break, I added another one.
Yeah,
so, yep.
That's good. So what I did was just to demo what we can do with this tool was I had previously created a deployment for Adobe Flash Player 10 and purposely created a rule that said if the physical memory on the box is 4 gigabytes, then only install this particular application. Well, if you're a tech support person and somebody calls you after pushing the install button on the application catalog and seeing that the application failed to install, as a tech support, if you do not have access to the console and you can't go to the in-console monitoring to see why this particular deployment failed for this user, you can use this tool, reach out to that client remotely, and then just browse through the information here. And just for the sake of demo purposes, we will jump right back here to the requirements for violation. Violation, as some of us would say, is a loaded term here, but what we are showing you here is that the deployment type expects, or the requirement rule expects, that there should be 4 gigabytes of RAM on the machine, but this is only 1.5 gigabytes. Of course, this needs to be a little bit better than how we formatted this here, but it's a work in progress. We got the v1.0 out there. We'll keep improving on it, and we'll let you know, and we'll keep putting out the new versions as we go along. Along with that, you have different tabs here that talk about this particular deployment. You can see the assignments here. You can see all the policy-related information all over here. The evaluation that we did for that particular deployment. The content-related tab gives you all the content-related information. And the enforcement would even show you the install and the uninstall command line, like the way they are shown here. So if you forgot to provide an uninstall command line, and you did deploy an uninstall for a client, and if it fails, the tech support could figure out that, hey, look, there is no uninstall defined because it's a script-based DT or an exe that you're using, and hence you need to go figure out what that is. And then you have reporting, that some additional information that you can look at. We could also just go ahead and launch the logs straight, and if you have installed CM Trace tool, then it'll open up in that, and you can look at the logs right here.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. What do you think of that?
You guys can use this one.
All right, so what have you seen today? Well, first of all, you saw 2 desperate program managers. Very disappointed because they thought they weren't going to get to show all the hard work that they and their team did for the customers and for trying to help you manage your business more effectively. So that was the first takeaway. We're happy that we're able to get things running and show you pretty much all the demos we wanted to show you in 2 sessions. But aside from that, all jokes aside, wanted to really present to you this new way of deploying software. The people-centric, user-based targeting, the app model, the rules, the detection methods, all the capabilities built in there for deploying software. We'd love for you to start evaluating, if you haven't already, how you can start deploying software using the application model. I know you've got a lot of investment in packaged programs, but really using the app model long-term is going to help you with the user-device affinity that we have and the rich set of rules and detection methods. You're going to be able to more effectively deploy software in your environment. Once again, I mentioned packaged programs live on. You can still target devices. The way of doing things in the past is still available to you in CM12. We're just asking to evaluate app model and see the advantages that there are there. We also got to show you the troubleshooting tool. I'm happy we got a chance to show you that. I actually didn't know you could launch out to the log file, so that's pretty neat. But anyway, we really thank you for attending today. We thank you for your patience over 2 sessions. Appreciate your time. Really enjoy the rest of the week and have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.